The morning sun cast long shadows across the pristine gardens of Windsor Castle as Prince George walked quietly along the stone pathway. At 15 years old, he had grown accustomed to the constant presence of security personnel. But today something felt different. The usual chatter and coordinated movements of his protection team seemed more subdued than normal. James Mitchell had been assigned to Prince George's security detail for nearly 3 years. A former military officer with an impeccable record, James took his responsibilities seriously. He understood that protecting a member of the royal family required not just physical vigilance, but also emotional intelligence and the ability to remain invisible when necessary. The young prince had always been polite to him, offering brief nods and occasional thank yous. But their interactions remained professional and distant. On this particular morning, James noticed something unusual in Prince George's demeanor. The teenager seemed more observant than usual, his eyes scanning the faces of the security team with what appeared to be genuine interest, rather than the typical indifference most royals displayed toward their protection details. James had worked with enough high-profile individuals to recognize when someone was truly paying attention to the people around them. Prince George paused near the rose garden, pretending to examine the blooming flowers while actually observing James from his peripheral vision. He had been watching his security team more closely over the past few weeks, and something about James had caught his attention. Unlike the other guards who maintained stoic expressions and rigid postures, James occasionally allowed small glimpses of humanity to show through his professional facade. The prince had noticed how James always positioned himself to have the best view of potential threats while remaining as unobtrusive as possible. He observed how the guards' eyes constantly moved, scanning for anything out of place, yet never made the royal family feel like they were under surveillance. There was a quiet dignity in the way James carried himself that reminded Prince George of his grandfather's stories about dedicated service members. What truly struck the young prince was an incident he had witnessed the previous week. During a public engagement, a small child had accidentally dropped her toy near the security barrier. While other guards maintained their positions, James had quickly but carefully retrieved the toy and returned it to the delighted child with a gentle smile. The moment lasted only seconds, and most people missed it entirely. But Prince George had seen the kindness in that simple gesture. James had no idea that his actions were being observed so carefully. He continued his duties as usual, following the established protocols and maintaining the high standards expected of royal protection officers. His background in the military had taught him discipline and attention to detail, but his natural compassion made him different from many of his colleagues who seemed to view their role as purely mechanical. The guard's personal life remained largely separate from his professional responsibilities. He lived in a modest flat in London, visited his elderly mother every weekend, and spent his free time reading history books and tending to a small garden on his balcony. James had never married, dedicating most of his adult life to his military service and later to his role in royal protection. He found satisfaction in knowing that his work contributed to something larger than himself, even if the royal family members he protected rarely acknowledged his existence as anything more than a necessary security measure. Prince George's growing awareness of the people around him reflected a maturity that surprised even his closest advisors. The teenager had been raised with a strong sense of duty and service, but he was beginning to understand that true leadership meant recognizing the contributions of everyone around him, regardless of their rank or position. His parents had taught him about noblesse oblige, the idea that privilege comes with responsibility, but he was starting to interpret this concept in ways that went beyond traditional royal duties. The prince began to notice other details about James that revealed the man's character. He saw how the guard always arrived early for his shifts and how he took time to brief newer security team members with patience and thoroughness. James never sought recognition or praise for his work, seeming content to perform his duties with quiet professionalism. This humility impressed the young prince, who had grown up surrounded by people who often sought attention or favors from the royal family. During official events, Prince George started paying attention to how James interacted with other staff members. The guard treated everyone with the same level of respect, whether speaking to senior palace officials or junior maintenance workers. This consistent behavior stood out in an environment where many people adjusted their attitudes based on social hierarchies and perceived importance. The prince also noticed James's subtle acts of consideration. When elderly guests struggled with uneven terrain during outdoor events, James would quietly adjust his position to provide discreet assistance if needed. When children became overwhelmed by the crowds and noise at public appearances, he would create small spaces of calm through his positioning and gentle presence. These actions were never dramatic or attention-seeking, but they demonstrated a deep understanding of his role as both protector and public servant. As days passed, Prince George found himself increasingly curious about the man who watched over him with such dedicated professionalism. He wondered about James's life before joining the Royal Protection Team, about his motivations for choosing such demanding work, and about his thoughts on the constant scrutiny and pressure that came with protecting members of the royal family. The prince realized that he had spent years being protected by someone he knew almost nothing about, and this awareness bothered him more than he expected. The young royal began to understand that the security team members were not just anonymous figures in suits, but individuals with their own stories, challenges, and contributions to make. This realization would soon lead him to take an action that would surprise everyone around him and ultimately change the course of James Mitchell's life in ways no one could have predicted. The seeds of an extraordinary act of recognition were being planted in the mind of a future king who was learning to see beyond the formal structures that typically defined royal relationships. The opportunity for Prince George to learn more about James Mitchell came unexpectedly during a routine security briefing. The prince had been walking past his father's study when he overheard a conversation between senior palace officials and the head of security. They were discussing staff rotations and performance evaluations, and James's name came up in the discussion. Prince George lingered outside the door, not to eavesdrop on sensitive security matters, but because he was genuinely interested in hearing how his protection team was perceived by the palace administration. What he heard surprised him. The security chief spoke about James with obvious respect, mentioning his exceptional service record and his ability to anticipate potential problems before they developed. More importantly, the conversation revealed details about James's background that the prince had never known. James Mitchell had served in Afghanistan as a young soldier, where he had been decorated for bravery. After protecting civilians during a dangerous evacuation mission, he had lost several close friends during his military service, experiences that had shaped his approach to protection work. The security chief explained that James viewed his role with the royal family as a continuation of his military service, a way to serve his country and protect people who couldn't protect themselves. The conversation also revealed that James had specifically requested assignment to Prince George's detail when a position became available. Unlike some guards who preferred working with adult royals because the assignments were often more predictable, James had asked to work with the younger generation of the royal family. He believed that protecting the future of the monarchy was the most meaningful contribution he could make to the institution he respected. Prince George learned that James had turned down more prestigious positions within the Royal Protection Unit to remain with his current assignment. He could have been promoted to work directly with the king or other senior royals, positions that would have come with better pay and higher status within the security hierarchy. Instead, James had chosen to stay where he felt he could make the most difference, even though it meant less recognition and fewer opportunities for advancement. The most striking revelation came when the security chief mentioned that James donated a significant portion of his salary to a charity that supported veterans struggling with post-traumatic stress. The guard had never spoken about this contribution, and most of his colleagues were unaware of his charitable activities. James apparently believed that his comfortable position and stable income gave him a responsibility to help fellow veterans who had not been as fortunate in their transition to civilian life. After hearing this conversation, Prince George felt a profound shift in how he viewed the man who had been silently protecting him for 3 years. James was not just a professional doing his job, but someone who had made personal sacrifices and conscious choices to serve others. The prince realized that he had been protected by a genuine hero, someone whose character and values aligned perfectly with the principles his parents had tried to teach him about service and duty. The young prince began to observe James with new understanding. He noticed how the guard never complained about long hours or difficult working conditions. During outdoor events and bad weather, James remained focused and alert despite being cold or wet. When security protocols required him to miss breaks or work extended shifts, he adapted without showing any signs of frustration or resentment. Prince George also started to see how James's military background influenced his approach to protection work. The guard's movements were efficient and purposeful, never wasting energy or motion. His awareness of surroundings was constant, but never appeared paranoid or excessive. James had the ability to remain completely alert while appearing relaxed, a skill that made the royal family feel safe without feeling restricted. The prince began to notice James's interactions with other members of the protection team. The guard served as an informal mentor to newer officers, sharing his experience and knowledge without being condescending or territorial. When challenging situations arose, other team members naturally looked to James for guidance, recognizing his expertise and judgment. Despite having no official leadership role, James had become a stabilizing influence within the security detail. During public engagements, Prince George started paying attention to how James managed the complex balance between protection and public access. The guard understood that royal appearances were about connecting with people, not hiding from them. He found ways to maintain security without creating barriers that would prevent genuine interactions between the royal family and the public. This required constant assessment and adjustment, skills that James performed with apparent ease. The prince observed that James treated every potential threat seriously, while avoiding the creation of unnecessary tension or drama. When suspicious individuals approached royal events, James would smoothly coordinate with other security personnel to address the situation without disrupting the proceedings or alarming bystanders. His ability to handle problems quietly and efficiently allowed the royal family to focus on their public duties without distraction. Prince George began to understand that James's presence provided more than just physical protection. The guard's calm confidence and professional competence created an atmosphere of stability that allowed the young prince to engage more naturally with his royal responsibilities. Knowing that someone so capable and dedicated was watching over him gave Prince George the freedom to be more spontaneous and authentic during public appearances. The realization that James had chosen to work with him specifically, despite having other options, deeply moved the prince. In a world where many people sought to associate with the royal family for personal gain or status, James had made a decision based purely on his desire to serve and protect. This selfless motivation stood in stark contrast to the behavior of many individuals who surrounded the royal family with their own agendas and expectations. As Prince George processed these revelations about James Mitchell, he began to feel that simply accepting the guard's protection was not enough. The prince started to believe that exceptional service deserved recognition, and that people like James should be acknowledged for their contributions. This growing conviction would soon lead the young royal to take action that would surprise everyone around him and demonstrate a level of maturity and leadership that exceeded his years. Prince George's newfound awareness of James Mitchell's character and service record created an internal conflict that grew stronger each day. The young prince found himself in the unusual position of wanting to express genuine appreciation to someone whose role required him to remain virtually invisible. Traditional royal protocol offered no guidance for this situation, as members of the royal family were generally expected to maintain formal distance from their security personnel. The prince's dilemma was complicated by his understanding of how the royal household operated. Any deviation from established protocol could create problems not just for himself, but for James and the entire security team. Recognition that was too public might embarrass James or make his colleagues uncomfortable. Recognition that was too private might be seen as inappropriate or could be misinterpreted by palace officials who monitored all royal interactions with staff members. Despite these challenges, Prince George felt increasingly compelled to find a way to acknowledge James's exceptional service. The prince had been raised to understand that with privilege came responsibility, and he was beginning to interpret this principle in ways that went beyond ceremonial duties and public appearances. He believed that recognizing the people who made royal life possible was itself a form of service, a way of honoring the contributions of individuals who typically received little public acknowledgement. The young prince decided to approach his private secretary, a trusted advisor who had worked with the royal family for many years. During a quiet moment between official engagements, Prince George asked about the protocols for recognizing outstanding service by protection officers. His private secretary was initially surprised by the question, explaining that such recognition typically came through official channels within the security service, not directly from the royal family members being protected. However, the private secretary could see that Prince George's interest was genuine and thoughtful, rather than impulsive. After some consideration, he explained that there were precedents for royal family members nominating protection officers for official honors, though such recommendations were rare and had to be handled very carefully. The process required detailed documentation of the officer's service and contributions, along with support from senior security officials. Prince George asked his private secretary to begin researching the specific procedures for such nominations. He wanted to understand exactly what would be required and what impact such recognition might have on James's career. The prince was determined to ensure that any action he took would benefit James rather than create complications or unwanted attention that might interfere with the guard's ability to do his job effectively. While this research was being conducted, Prince George continued to observe James during their daily interactions. The prince noticed that the guard seemed completely unaware of the attention he was receiving or the discussions taking place about him. James continued his duties with the same quiet professionalism he had always displayed, never seeking recognition or acknowledgement for his work. The prince observed a particularly telling incident during a public engagement at a children's hospital. While visiting young patients, Prince George noticed that James positioned himself to interact briefly with a child in a wheelchair, who seemed fascinated by the guard's presence. Without abandoning his security responsibilities, James took a moment to answer the child's questions about his job, and even allowed the youngster to examine his radio equipment. The interaction lasted only a few minutes, but it demonstrated James's ability to balance his professional duties with genuine human compassion. After witnessing this incident, Prince George felt even more convinced that James deserved formal recognition. The guard's ability to maintain strict security protocols while still showing kindness and consideration to others represented exactly the kind of service that should be honored. The prince realized that recognizing James would not just acknowledge one individual's contributions, but would also send a message about the values that the royal family wanted to promote. The research conducted by Prince George's private secretary revealed that nominating a protection officer for recognition was indeed possible, but it required careful coordination with multiple levels of palace administration and security services. The process was designed to ensure that such recognition did not compromise security protocols or create problems within the protection teams. Any nomination had to be supported by detailed documentation and endorsed by senior officials who could attest to the officer's exceptional performance. Prince George learned that successful nominations typically involved officers who had served for extended periods with distinction, who had gone above and beyond their basic duties, or who had made significant contributions to the security and safety of the royal family. James Mitchell's service record clearly met these criteria, but the prince wanted to ensure that his nomination would be based on objective merit rather than personal preference. The young prince decided to speak directly with the head of his security detail, a senior officer who had worked with James for several years. During a private conversation, Prince George asked about James's performance and contributions without initially revealing his interest in formal recognition. The security chief's response exceeded the prince's expectations, as he spoke enthusiastically about James's professionalism, reliability, and positive influence on the entire protection team. The security chief explained that James had become an unofficial mentor to newer officers, helping them understand not just the technical aspects of protection work, but also the unique requirements of working with the royal family. James's military experience and natural leadership abilities made him valuable beyond his official role, and his colleagues respected his judgment and expertise. The security chief indicated that James was exactly the kind of officer who deserved recognition for his contributions. Encouraged by this conversation, Prince George asked his private secretary to begin the formal process of nominating James for recognition. The prince wanted to ensure that every step was handled properly and that James would be honored in a way that reflected the significance of his service. This decision represented a departure from typical royal behavior, but Prince George believed it was the right thing to do. The prince understood that his action might surprise palace officials and even his own family members, who were accustomed to more traditional approaches to staff relations. However, he felt confident that recognizing exceptional service was consistent with the values he had been taught about leadership and responsibility. Prince George was prepared to defend his decision and to explain why he believed James Mitchell deserved formal acknowledgement for his outstanding contributions to royal security. The formal nomination process for James Mitchell moved forward with surprising efficiency once Prince George's private secretary initiated the necessary procedures. The palace administration, initially cautious about such an unusual request from a young royal, became increasingly supportive as they reviewed James's service record and spoke with colleagues who had worked with him over the years. The nomination required detailed documentation of James's specific contributions to royal security, beyond his basic job requirements. Prince George worked closely with his private secretary to compile examples of the Guard's exceptional service, drawing on observations from multiple sources within the royal household. The evidence painted a picture of someone who had consistently exceeded expectations while maintaining the highest standards of professionalism and discretion. Palace officials interviewed other members of the security team to gather additional perspectives on James's performance and contributions. These conversations revealed unanimous respect for James among his colleagues, who described him as someone who made everyone around him better at their jobs. Several officers mentioned specific instances where James's quick thinking and calm leadership had prevented potential problems or improved security outcomes. The head of Royal Protection Services provided a comprehensive assessment of James's work, highlighting his perfect attendance record, his willingness to take on additional responsibilities, and his positive influence on team morale. The assessment noted that James had never received a single complaint or criticism during his years of service, an almost unprecedented record in a demanding field where even minor issues were typically documented and addressed. As the nomination progressed through various levels of review, Prince George began to consider how the recognition should be presented to James. The prince wanted the acknowledgement to be meaningful and respectful, reflecting the significance of James's contributions while remaining appropriate for someone who valued privacy and professional discretion. The challenge was finding a way to honor exceptional service without creating embarrassment or unwanted attention. Prince George's parents, initially surprised by their son's initiative, became supportive once they understood the thoroughness of his approach and the genuine merit of his nomination. They recognized that their son was demonstrating mature judgment and leadership qualities that would serve him well in his future royal responsibilities. The prince's ability to recognize and appreciate excellent service from those around him was exactly the kind of quality that effective leaders needed to develop. The nomination process also revealed interesting details about James's background that even senior palace officials had not known. His military decorations were more extensive than most people realized, and his post-service contributions to veteran support organizations demonstrated a commitment to service that extended far beyond his paid employment. These discoveries reinforced the assessment that James was exactly the kind of individual who deserved formal recognition. James himself remained completely unaware of the nomination process taking place around him. He continued his daily duties with the same quiet professionalism he had always displayed, treating Prince George with the same respectful distance that protocol required. The Guard had no idea that his years of dedicated service were being carefully documented and evaluated by some of the highest-ranking officials in the royal household. Prince George found it increasingly difficult to maintain normal interactions with James while knowing that significant recognition was being arranged on his behalf. The prince had to resist the temptation to give hints or clues about what was happening, understanding that surprise was an important element of the recognition process. The young royal practiced maintaining his usual demeanor while internally feeling excited about the acknowledgement that James would soon receive. The final approval for James's recognition came from the highest levels of the royal household, with endorsements from security chiefs, palace administrators, and senior advisors. The unanimous support for the nomination validated Prince George's judgment and demonstrated that exceptional service was valued throughout the royal organization. The recognition would take the form of a formal commendation that would become part of James's permanent service record and could potentially open doors for career advancement. Palace officials worked carefully to plan the presentation of James's recognition in a way that would be meaningful but not disruptive to ongoing security operations. They decided that the acknowledgement should be presented privately, with only a small group of senior officials present, to respect James's preference for avoiding public attention, while still ensuring that his colleagues and superiors understood the significance of his achievement. Prince George requested permission to present the recognition personally, explaining that he wanted James to understand that the acknowledgement came from genuine appreciation for his service, rather than from administrative routine. This request was approved after careful consideration, with officials recognizing that the personal presentation would make the recognition more meaningful and would demonstrate the prince's developing leadership qualities. The date for the presentation was set for a quiet afternoon, when Prince George's schedule included time at Windsor Castle without public engagements. This timing would allow for a private ceremony that would not interfere with ongoing security operations or attract unwanted media attention. The location was chosen to be a small receiving room that was formal enough to reflect the significance of the occasion, but intimate enough to maintain the personal nature of the recognition. As the presentation date approached, Prince George felt a mixture of excitement and nervousness about acknowledging James's service. The prince understood that this moment would represent more than just the recognition of one individual's contributions. It would demonstrate his own understanding of leadership and his commitment to appreciating the people who made royal life possible. The young prince hoped that his action would encourage other members of the royal family to similarly recognize exceptional service when they encountered it. The palace staff involved in organizing the recognition ceremony were impressed by Prince George's thoughtfulness and attention to detail. The young royal had insisted that every aspect of the presentation should reflect respect for James's service and acknowledge the significance of his contributions. This careful approach demonstrated maturity and consideration that exceeded expectations. For someone of the prince's age and experience, James Mitchell continued his duties in the days leading up to the presentation, completely unaware that his years of quiet, professional service were about to be formally recognized in a way that would surprise him and validate his commitment to protecting the royal family. The stage was set for a moment that would demonstrate the power of thoughtful leadership and genuine appreciation for exceptional service. The morning of the recognition ceremony arrived with typical British weather, gray clouds threatening rain over Windsor Castle. James Mitchell began his shift as he always did, arriving 30 minutes early to review security briefings and coordinate with the night shift personnel. He had no indication that this day would be any different from the hundreds of others he had worked protecting Prince George and the royal family. Prince George felt unusually nervous during his morning routine, knowing that the afternoon would bring a moment he had been planning for weeks. The young prince reviewed his prepared remarks multiple times, wanting to ensure that his words would properly convey his appreciation for James's service. He understood that this recognition represented more than a simple thank you. It was an acknowledgement of values and principles that he wanted to embody as a future leader. The palace staff involved in the ceremony made final preparations during the late morning hours. The small receiving room was arranged with appropriate dignity, featuring a simple podium and chairs for the few officials who would witness the presentation. The formal commendation document was prepared with careful attention to detail, documenting James's specific contributions and the reasons for his recognition in language that reflected the significance of his service. James spent the morning hours performing his usual duties, conducting security sweeps and coordinating with other protection officers for the day's activities. He noticed that Prince George seemed slightly different, perhaps more animated than usual, but attributed this to the natural variations in mood that anyone might experience. The guard had no reason to suspect that his own life was about to change in an unexpected way. As the afternoon approached, Prince George's private secretary approached James with what appeared to be a routine request. The secretary explained that the prince needed to conduct a brief administrative meeting and requested that James accompany him to one of the smaller reception rooms. This type of request was not unusual, as security protocols required protection officers to maintain visual contact with their principals even during routine activities. James followed the private secretary through the familiar corridors of Windsor Castle, his professional instincts automatically scanning for anything unusual or out of place. As they approached the designated room, he noticed that other senior palace officials were present, including the head of Royal Protection Services and several administrators he recognized, but rarely interacted with directly. The gathering seemed more formal than typical administrative meetings, but James assumed there were security briefings or protocol updates that required his attention. When Prince George entered the room, James immediately moved to his assigned position, ready to monitor the proceedings while remaining as unobtrusive as possible. The prince appeared composed but had an unusual intensity in his demeanor that suggested the meeting was more significant than routine business. James maintained his professional awareness while wondering what type of administrative matter required such a formal gathering. Prince George approached the small podium and began to speak, his voice clear and confident despite his internal nervousness. He explained that they had gathered to recognize exceptional service to the royal family, service that went above and beyond normal job requirements and demonstrated the highest standards of professionalism and dedication. As the prince continued speaking, James began to realize that this was not an administrative meeting at all, but some type of recognition ceremony. The young prince spoke about the importance of acknowledging the people who made royal life possible, individuals whose contributions often went unnoticed, despite their critical importance to the institution. He emphasized that true leadership required recognizing and appreciating excellent service, and that such recognition was itself a form of service to the values and principles that the royal family represented. As Prince George continued his remarks, James felt a growing sense of disbelief as he began to understand that the ceremony was somehow connected to him. The prince spoke about a protection officer who had demonstrated exceptional dedication, professionalism, and character over several years of service. The description included specific details about military background, charitable contributions, and positive influence on colleagues that made it clear James was the subject of the recognition. The moment of realization hit James with surprising emotional force. After years of working to remain invisible and unnoticed, being acknowledged for his service felt almost overwhelming. He had chosen protection work because he believed in serving something larger than himself, never expecting or seeking personal recognition for simply doing his job to the best of his ability. Prince George called James forward and presented him with the formal commendation, explaining that the recognition came not just from palace administration, but from personal observation and appreciation of his exceptional service. The prince expressed genuine gratitude for James's dedication and professionalism, emphasizing that such service made a real difference in the lives of the people he protected. James accepted the commendation with visible emotion, struggling to maintain his professional composure while processing the unexpected honor. The formal document recognized his outstanding contribution to royal security and his positive influence on the protection team, acknowledgments that validated years of dedicated service. For someone who had spent his career working to remain in the background, being formally recognized felt both humbling and deeply meaningful. The other officials present offered their congratulations and expressed their own appreciation for James's service. Several colleagues mentioned specific instances where his professionalism and expertise had made their jobs easier or improved security outcomes. The unanimous respect and admiration from his peers reinforced the significance of the recognition and demonstrated that his contributions had been noticed and valued throughout the organization. Prince George personally thanked James for his service, explaining that the recognition represented genuine appreciation rather than administrative routine. The prince expressed hope that the acknowledgement would encourage other exceptional service members and demonstrate the royal family's commitment to appreciating the people who made their work possible. As the ceremony concluded, James felt a profound sense of validation and appreciation that he had never expected to experience in his professional life. The recognition represented more than personal acknowledgement. It validated his belief that service to others was meaningful and worthwhile, even when performed without expectation of recognition or reward. The impact of Prince George's thoughtful action would soon extend far beyond the simple presentation of a commendation. The young prince had demonstrated leadership qualities that impressed everyone present, and had created a moment that would have lasting significance for both himself and James Mitchell. Neither of them could have predicted how this recognition would ultimately change the course of events in ways that would surprise everyone involved. The days following the recognition ceremony brought unexpected changes to James Mitchell's daily routine and professional perspective. While he returned to his regular duties protecting Prince George, the formal acknowledgement had created a subtle shift in how he viewed his role and his relationship with the royal family. The commendation represented validation of his service, philosophy, and encouraged him to continue striving for excellence in ways that went beyond basic job requirements. James found himself reflecting deeply on the meaning of the recognition he had received. Throughout his military career and his years in royal protection, he had focused on serving others without expecting acknowledgement or reward. Prince George's thoughtful gesture had demonstrated that exceptional service was indeed noticed and valued, even when performed quietly and without seeking attention. This realization reinforced James's commitment to his work, while also making him consider his long-term career goals and aspirations. The news of James's recognition spread gradually throughout the Royal Protection Services, generating positive reactions from colleagues who had worked with him over the years. Many officers expressed genuine happiness for James's acknowledgement, recognizing that his recognition reflected well on the entire protection team. The ceremony had demonstrated that exceptional service could be formally acknowledged, potentially encouraging other officers to strive for similar excellence in their own duties. Prince George noticed changes in James's demeanor following the recognition ceremony. While the guard maintained his professional composure and continued performing his duties with the same reliability, there seemed to be a renewed sense of purpose and energy in his approach to work. The prince felt satisfied that his decision to recognize James had been worthwhile and had achieved its intended purpose of acknowledging exceptional service. However, the recognition ceremony had also prompted James to engage in serious self-reflection about his future career path and personal goals. The formal acknowledgement had made him more visible within the royal protection hierarchy, potentially opening doors for advancement opportunities that had not previously been available. James began to consider whether remaining in his current position was the best use of his skills and experience, or whether he should explore other ways to serve and contribute to society. The commendation had included language that highlighted James's leadership abilities and positive influence on his colleagues. This recognition made him realize that he possessed skills and experience that could be valuable in other contexts beyond royal protection. James began to think about opportunities in training, mentoring, or leadership roles that might allow him to have a broader impact on security services or veteran support organizations. During quiet moments between duties, James found himself considering the possibility of pursuing opportunities that would allow him to train and develop other protection officers. His military experience and years of royal service had given him insights and expertise that could benefit newer officers entering the field. The recognition ceremony had demonstrated that his contributions were valued, suggesting that his knowledge and experience might be useful in educational or training contexts. James also began to think more seriously about his longstanding interest in supporting fellow veterans who were struggling with the transition to civilian life. His charitable contributions had always been important to him, but he wondered whether he could make a more significant impact by dedicating more time and energy to veteran support organizations. The recognition from Prince George had given him confidence that his service orientation and leadership abilities could be valuable in different contexts. The guard's growing consideration of alternative career paths was influenced by his realization that he had achieved his primary goals in royal protection work. He had served with distinction, earned the respect of his colleagues, and received formal recognition for his contributions. James began to feel that continuing in his current role might prevent him from exploring other ways to serve that could have broader impact on more people's lives. Prince George remained unaware of the internal deliberations that his recognition had prompted in James's mind. The young prince continued his daily activities with the security team, pleased that his gesture had been well received and confident that he had made the right decision in acknowledging exceptional service. The prince viewed the recognition ceremony as a successful demonstration of leadership principles and hoped it would encourage similar acknowledgement of outstanding service throughout the royal household. James's contemplation of his future was complicated by his genuine respect and affection for Prince George and the royal family. He had developed professional relationships and personal attachments that made the prospect of leaving difficult to consider. The guard understood that his departure would require careful timing and planning to ensure continuity of protection services and minimal disruption to established security protocols. As weeks passed, following the recognition ceremony, James began to research opportunities in veteran services and security training programs. He discovered several organizations that were seeking experienced professionals to develop training curricula and mentor new personnel entering security and protection fields. These opportunities appealed to James because they would allow him to share his knowledge and experience while continuing to serve causes larger than himself. The Guard also explored possibilities for increased involvement with the Veterans Charity he had been supporting financially. The organization had expressed interest in having him take on a more active role, potentially helping to develop programs for veterans transitioning to security and protection careers. This opportunity particularly appealed to James because it would combine his professional expertise with his personal commitment to supporting fellow service members. James's consideration of these alternatives was driven by his growing sense that he had accomplished what he set out to achieve in royal protection work. The recognition from Prince George had provided validation and closure to this chapter of his career, making him feel ready to explore new challenges and opportunities for service. The Guard began to believe that his skills and experience could have greater impact in roles focused on training, mentoring, and supporting others. The decision-making process was emotionally difficult for James because it required him to consider leaving a position that had provided stability, purpose, and professional satisfaction for several years. However, the recognition ceremony had given him confidence in his abilities and value as a professional, encouraging him to consider opportunities that might have seemed unrealistic or presumptuous before receiving formal acknowledgement of his contributions. As James continued to wrestle with these considerations, he remained fully committed to his current duties, while gradually developing a clearer vision of his future goals and aspirations. The recognition from Prince George had created an unexpected catalyst for personal and professional growth that would soon lead to a decision that would surprise everyone who knew him. 3 months after the recognition ceremony, James Mitchell made a decision that surprised everyone who knew him. He submitted his resignation from the Royal Protection Services, effective in 6 weeks, to pursue opportunities in veteran services and security training. The announcement sent ripples of shock through the protection team and palace administration, as James was considered one of their most valuable and reliable officers. The resignation letter James submitted was thoughtful and respectful, expressing deep gratitude for his years of service with the royal family, and explaining his decision to pursue opportunities that would allow him to have broader impact on veteran support and security training. He emphasized that his departure was motivated by personal growth goals rather than any dissatisfaction with his current position or the royal household. Prince George learned about James's resignation through his private secretary, who delivered the news with obvious surprise and concern. The young prince's initial reaction was shock, followed quickly by worry that his recognition ceremony had somehow contributed to James's decision to leave. Prince George wondered whether the acknowledgement had created pressure or expectations that made James uncomfortable in his position. The head of Royal Protection Services met with James to understand his motivations and to attempt to persuade him to reconsider his decision. James explained that the recognition from Prince George had actually strengthened his confidence and clarified his desire to pursue opportunities for broader service impact. He assured his supervisor that the decision was positive rather than reactive, driven by opportunity rather than dissatisfaction. James's colleagues in the protection team expressed genuine sadness about his departure, while respecting his decision to pursue new challenges. Many officers mentioned how much they had learned from working with James and how his mentorship had improved their own performance and job satisfaction. Several team members asked him to maintain contact and expressed hope that his new role might create opportunities for continued collaboration. Prince George requested a private meeting with James to discuss his resignation and to ensure that the recognition ceremony had not created unintended consequences. During their conversation, James explained that the acknowledgement had actually provided validation and encouragement for pursuing goals he had been considering for some time. The guard emphasized that the prince's gesture had been deeply meaningful and had given him confidence to pursue opportunities for expanded service. The young prince felt both sadness and pride as he listened to James explain his future plans. Prince George realized that his recognition had potentially contributed to losing an excellent protection officer, but he also understood that James's decision represented exactly the kind of principled service commitment that deserved support. The prince expressed his respect for James's choice and offered assistance with references or recommendations for his new endeavors. James's new position would involve developing training programs for security personnel transitioning from military service to civilian protection roles. The organization that hired him was a respected institution that provided security services for government agencies and private clients, with a specific focus on supporting veteran employment and career development. James would be responsible for creating curricula and mentoring programs that would help other veterans succeed in security careers. The transition period allowed James to train his replacement and ensure continuity of protection services for Prince George. He worked closely with palace officials to document his procedures and insights, creating resources that would help future officers understand the unique requirements of royal protection work. James wanted to ensure that his departure would not create any gaps in security, coverage, or professional standards. Prince George's parents learned about James's resignation and the circumstances surrounding his decision, including their son's role in recognizing his service. They expressed pride in Prince George's mature approach to acknowledging exceptional service, while also recognizing that such actions could have unexpected consequences. The experience provided valuable lessons about leadership and the complex effects that recognition and appreciation could have on people's career decisions. As James's final weeks in royal protection approached, he reflected on his years of service with deep satisfaction and gratitude. The recognition from Prince George had provided perfect closure to this chapter of his career, validating his approach to service and giving him confidence to pursue new challenges. James felt that he was leaving at the right time and for the right reasons, having accomplished his goals and contributed meaningfully to royal security. The farewell gathering organized by James's colleagues was both celebratory and emotional, acknowledging his contributions while expressing support for his future endeavors. Prince George attended the gathering and spoke briefly about James's exceptional service and character, emphasizing that his departure represented growth and opportunity rather than loss. The young prince's remarks demonstrated maturity and leadership that impressed everyone present. James's final day of service was deliberately low-key, as he preferred to conclude his royal protection career without fanfare or extensive ceremony. He completed his duties with the same professionalism he had always displayed, ensuring that all protocols were followed and that his replacement was fully prepared to assume responsibilities. James left Windsor Castle quietly, carrying with him the formal commendation and the respect of everyone who had worked with him. The impact of Prince George's recognition extended far beyond James's individual career decision. The young prince had learned valuable lessons about leadership, the power of acknowledgement, and the complex effects that thoughtful gestures could have on people's lives. The experience had shown him that recognizing exceptional service was important, but that such recognition could also inspire people to pursue new challenges and opportunities. James Mitchell's resignation became a positive example throughout the Royal Protection Services, demonstrating that excellent service could lead to career advancement and new opportunities for impact. His departure was viewed not as a loss, but as evidence that the organization developed personnel who became valuable in other contexts. James's success in his new role would continue to reflect well on his royal protection experience and training. The story of Prince George's recognition and James's subsequent career decision became a quiet legend within the royal household, illustrating the importance of acknowledging exceptional service and the unexpected ways that thoughtful leadership could influence people's lives. Both the young prince and the former guard had gained valuable experience that would serve them well in their respective futures, demonstrating that meaningful recognition could create positive change that extended far beyond the original gesture. Years later, Prince George would look back on this experience as a formative lesson in leadership, teaching him that acknowledging excellence was important, but that true leaders also needed to understand and accept the complex consequences of their actions. The young prince had learned that inspiring others sometimes meant supporting their decisions to pursue new challenges, even when those decisions resulted in personal loss for the leader who provided the recognition.